The smell reached him before the sound did. Red lifted his coffee toward his mouth and froze halfway. Wet ash cooling on cold air. Melted plastic. Singed hair. Red lifted his coffee toward his mouth and froze halfway. His fingers tightened around the mug. Porcelain tapped softly against the metal ring on his hand. Then the scream tore through Linda's diner. It cut across the clatter of plates and low chatter, sharp enough to make the bell over the front door slam against its frame with a harsh clang. Every head in the room turned at once. She stood in the doorway like somebody had dragged the fire in behind her. Bare feet, black with soot and scraped raw. A pink unicorn nightgown burned brown and gray, sleeve half gone, hem eaten away into ragged teeth. Blonde hair hacked short by flame, the ends melted dark and stiff. Ash streaked her cheeks in crooked rivers where tears had tried to run clean. For a heartbeat, she just stared at the room, chest jumping in fast, shallow gulps. Then her knees gave out. She did not hit the floor. She collapsed against Red's boots, small hands grabbing for balance, clutching something to her chest. It smeared black across his jeans before he understood that it was a teddy bear. Its fur burned away. One plastic eye melted into a glossy crater, white stuffing leaking out in tired clumps that dropped onto the tile. They burned it. She gasped. Her voice sounded torn, like she had screamed it all night. They burned our house down. The diner stopped breathing. A fork hovered in midair. Coffee stopped pouring. The old song on the radio faded into the background hum of refrigerators and fluorescent lights. Red set his mug down carefully. The small click of ceramic on the tabletop felt almost obscene. He slid out of the booth. His crew moved with him on instinct. Bear rose like a boulder being pushed upright. Tank's chair scraped as he stood, broad shoulders filling the space. Wolf slipped off his stool with quiet economy. Smoke's jittery leg went still. Doc already had his eyes on the girl's hands, on her breathing, on the panic in her face. They closed around her without talking. 6 men in leather and denim forming a rough wall between her and the rest of the diner. Up close, the details sharpened. Blisters just beginning to swell along the sides of her fingers. Tiny cuts on her shins, dotted with dirt and dried blood. Soot ground into the hollow of her throat, turning soft skin the color of old charcoal. The little bones in her wrists looked too thin under all that damage. And Mommy is still inside. She choked. The words dropped heavy in the stillness. Somewhere at the counter, a trucker muttered something that sounded half like a prayer and half like a curse. Red went down on one knee. It put his eyes level with hers. They were green and huge. It put his eyes level with hers. Red went down on one knee. "What is your name, sweetheart?" he asked. He did not soften his voice for cops or judges or club presidents. He softened it for her. She dragged in a shaky breath. "Emma," she whispered. "Emma Patterson." Her fingers clenched harder around the ruined bear. "And they killed my mommy." Bear's jaw flexed like stone under skin. Tank swore softly. The word too small for the situation, but all he had. Doc shifted closer, his presence steady as a hand on a shoulder. He set 2 fingers lightly against the inside of her wrist, feeling for the frantic drum of her pulse, eyes flicking over her burns and the lines of tension in her little body. His presence steady as a hand on a shoulder. "Hey," he said gently. "Hey." Feeling for the frantic drum of her pulse. He said gently, feeling for the frantic drum of her pulse. "Who burned your house, Emma?" Bear asked. "Who burned your house?" Her throat worked. Words tumbled out in a rush, tripping over each other. "Mr. Crane's men," she said. "They came last night. Daddy tried to stop them and they hit him. And there was glass and yelling and fire and the whole kitchen was orange," and her breath splintered, caught on a memory. Her mind did not want to drag up into daylight. Red cut in before the panic swallowed her whole. "Where is your dad now?" he asked. "Is he alive?" Emma nodded. A quick, jerky motion that shook ash from her hair. "Hospital," she croaked. He could not move. There was blood. They put him in an ambulance. I saw the lights through the window. Tank's hand curled into a fist on the edge of the table until his knuckles went white. Doc's fingers pressed a little firmer against her wrist. Pulse like a trapped bird. He murmured toward Red. "She is in shock. Burns are shallow, but she needs real bandages." He started to say the word hospital. Emma exploded. "No." Her scream hit a higher register than the first one. She snatched her hand away like his touch had turned to flame. "No hospital. They will find me there." Her terror hit the air like static, raising goose flesh. Wolf's voice came quiet but clear behind Red. "Who will?" "Mr. Crane," Emma said. The name came out like something filthy stuck to her tongue. "He owns the hospital. Daddy said he owns everything. The bank, the land, the sheriff, everything." Behind the counter, Linda flinched as if somebody had slapped her. Red lifted his eyes to her. Behind the counter, Linda flinched as if somebody had slapped her. "You know him." It was not a question. Years of sun and worry had carved deep lines around her mouth. It was not a question. Now they seemed to deepen in front of his eyes. "I do not know anything about fires." Her gaze kept drifting back to the girl. "But Marcus Crane has been buying up half this county for a couple of years now. Folks who sell get checks and fake smiles. Folks who do not, well," she shrugged, a tired little movement. "Barns catch at 3 in the morning. Tractors break in ways they should not. People end up in the emergency room. Sheriff Dawson is a good man, but Crane has got commissioners and bankers in his pocket. Nothing ever sticks to him." The words "owns everything" hung between Emma and that picture like smoke that refused to clear. Red felt an old anger stir in his ribs. Dusty fields. A foreclosure notice stapled to a fence post. Men in pressed shirts who managed to drive past his family without ever seeing them. He pushed that down. This was not about his ghosts. He focused on the kid in front of him, shaking like she stood in snow instead of overheated diner air. Linda finally got a blanket around Emma's shoulders. The fabric smelled like fryer oil and cheap detergent. Emma clutched it with one hand, the other welded to the burnt teddy bear. The fabric smelled like fryer oil and cheap detergent. "Emma," he said, catching her eyes again. "Where is your place from here?" She sniffed. 10 miles, she said, voice small. "Out on Hollow Creek Road." "Is your mom still in that house?" he asked, even though he already knew he was asking her to stand in the doorway of something awful. Her face folded. Tears welled up again and cut fresh, clean tracks down through the soot on her cheeks. "She told me to run." Emma whispered. She said, "Run to the road." "Emma, run as fast as you can." "So I did. I ran and I did not look back. I do not know if she got out. I did not look. I just ran." The diner sounds blurred again. Somewhere a fork finally clinked against a plate. Forgotten. The grill hissed where grease hit heat, steady and indifferent. "How did you end up here?" Wolf asked. "You just keep running till your legs gave out." Emma shook her head. That stubborn little motion had more spine than a lot of grown men Red knew. "My teacher," she said. "Miss Chen. Margaret Chen. She writes for the newspaper, too." A flicker of pride warmed her voice for half a second. She said, "If something really bad ever happened, and the grown-ups who were supposed to help did not help, I should find the Hells Angels." Her eyes moved over the patches on their vests, taking in wings and skulls, and a reputation most people cross the street to avoid. She said, "You are the ones who stop when everyone else just keeps driving." Something inside Red went still. He remembered a long dirt road and cars that never slowed. Headlights sliding by like they did not even see the boy standing at the fence with everything he owned in a cardboard box. He hated that a teacher had needed to give that kind of instruction to a child. He respected that she had. Your teacher sounds like she has her head on straight, he said. He glanced toward Tank. Get me a number for Margaret Chen, he said. Reporter who does not scare easy. Tank was already fishing out his phone, big thumbs moving faster than they looked like they should. Red turned back to Emma. The adrenaline that had carried her 10 miles on bare feet was draining out by the second. He could see it. Her eyelids drooped heavier between blinks. Her shoulders sagged under the weight of the blanket. The burned bear hung more from her hand than in it. Okay, he said. Here is what is going to happen. He spoke slowly, each sentence a stepping stone. Doc is going to fix up those hands as best he can without sending you anywhere near a hospital. Linda is going to get you something hot to drink and something to eat that is not smoke and fear. Me and my brothers, we are going to ride out to your farm. We are going to see what is left. We are going to look for your mom and your baby brother. And then we are going to have a serious talk with Mr. Crane. Her eyes widened, but there was something under the fear now. A fragile, dangerous little thing called hope. You will make him stop, she asked. The words came out so small he almost had to lean in to catch them. Red held her gaze. He did not believe in promising much in this life. But this was a burned little kid in a ruined nightgown clutching a dead teddy bear. I am going to make sure he answers for what he did, he said. To you, to your family, to everyone he has hurt. Do you believe me? She studied him like everything that came next depended on whether she did. After a long moment, she nodded. I believe you, she whispered. The weight of that belief settled on his shoulders heavier than his leather cut. Good, Red said quietly. He stood. Linda, he called, we are using your back office. Nobody saw this kid come in. Far as cops or anybody else is concerned, she was never here. Linda set the coffee pot down with a little thump. My eyes are bad and my memory is worse, she said. You boys go do what you do. Coffee will be waiting when you get back. Red squeezed Emma's shoulder with a hand that could have crushed it and did not. You stick with Doc, he told her. He fixes broken things for a living. Doc gave a quick two-finger salute. Come on, kid, he said. We will get those hands cleaned and see about some hot chocolate. You like marshmallows. Her mouth twitched, the ghost of a smile pushing through exhaustion. Yes, she said, a lot. They headed toward the back. The office door swung closed behind them with a soft click, cutting off the main room and the watching eyes and the smell of bacon and coffee. Outside, the light had shifted. Morning brightness had dulled to a flat gray that made the chrome on the bikes look harder. Red stepped into it and swung a leg over his Harley. The seat fit his frame like it had grown there. Around him, Bear, Tank, Wolf, Smoke. Doc's empty bike fell into their usual spots. He looked down the highway. 2 thin lanes of cracked asphalt ran out into fields and fence posts and far sky. Somewhere 10 miles ahead, the remains of a farmhouse were still throwing up smoke, whether anyone could see it or not. He twisted the key. The engine came to life with a deep, rolling growl that vibrated up through his boots. The other bikes followed, one after another, 6 throats of metal and fuel joining in a rough chorus. In the dim little office, one after another, she watched the line of bikes roll out of the lot, engines rumbling. Emma climbed up on a torn vinyl chair to peer through the dusty blinds. Her grip tightened on the scorched bear. Hit him, she whispered, voice ragged but steady. Please. Gravel crunched under tires as they hit the road. Wind caught Red's vest as he opened the throttle. The others slid into formation without a word. 2 wide at the front, 2 at the flanks, 2 behind, the way they had done for years. He had almost cleared the last turn beyond the diner when something in the rear-view mirror caught his eye. Far back on the highway, just a shape between fence posts, A dark sport utility vehicle eased onto the road. No headlights, no rush, just a quiet, steady presence rolling in the same direction they were headed. Not a police cruiser, not a farm truck. A company car for a man who liked to own things. Red watched it for a breath, then dropped the visor of his helmet. He rolled his wrist, sending a fresh surge of power through the bike. The speed climbed, the wind thickening around him. The others matched him without question. The speed climbed. There was no version of him that turned back now. The fire was out, but the place still felt like it was burning. Red killed his engine at the end of the Patterson Drive. One by one, the others rolled to a stop beside him, bikes ticking as hot metal met cooler air. Out here, there were no neighbors, no traffic hum, nothing but wind hissing through the grass and the faint, sour stink of wet ash. What had been a house was now a broken shadow of one. The roof had folded in, rafters jutting up like charred bones, walls leaned at bad angles, ready to fall. If anyone breathed too hard, the front steps still stood, stubborn and stupid, leading up to nothing. Thin gray smoke curled from pockets of debris, drifting into a clear blue sky that pretended none of this had happened. The barn to the right had been licked, not eaten. One wall blackened, windows cracked, doors scorched but still hanging. Beyond it, the fields stretched out green and gold, untouched and beautiful. Sprinklers sat waiting in the rows, shiny and intact. Someone wanted the family gone, not the land. Red swung off his bike, helmet dangling from his hand. The air tasted like a ruined cookout, like plastic and insulation, and somebody's life turned into cinders. Tank came up beside him, boots sinking a little into the damp ruts where fire trucks had sat. They put this out recently, he said, ground still wet. Smoke crouched by a fallen beam, brushed his knuckles against it, jerked his hand back. Still warm, he muttered. They lit it and left. Bear sniffed once, nose wrinkling. That ain't just wood, he said. That's furniture and wiring. Somebody cooked this on purpose. Red let his eyes sweep the property. House gone, barn wounded, fields perfect. He filed it away with everything Emma had said. Check the perimeter, he said. Bodies. Check the perimeter. Anything off? Wolf. Keep eyes on the road. They peeled off without argument. Tank angled toward the barn, scanning mud and gravel. Smoke moved along the fence line. Bear circled wide around the far side of the ruin. Wolf stayed near the bikes with his weight on his heels, where he could watch both highway and driveway. Red walked up the front path. Mud sucked at his boots. Broken glass glittered in the muck like a scattered handful of diamonds. The mailbox lay in the ditch on its side, door open, the name Patterson half burned away. He stepped onto the remains of the porch. Heat still rolled up from the boards in slow waves. A charred plank sagged under his weight and complained. Inside the black mess, he could still pick out ghosts of rooms. A twisted metal frame that had been a table, a sink full of collapsed debris, the suggestion of a staircase, edges eaten by flame. He knew the shape of this loss. His had come in the mail instead of with torches, but the result was the same. One day you had a place. The next day you just had memories and somebody else's paperwork saying it had never really been yours. Red. Tank's voice came from behind the barn, too tight to ignore. Red stepped back from the house and headed that way. Tank and Smoke stood on a low rise, half hidden by tall grass. The grass was flattened in a rough circle. The grass was flattened in a rough circle. A metal door sat flush with the ground. Red stepped back from the house and headed that way. In the middle of it, a heavy padlock dangled from the hasp, snapped clean through. The torn metal edges were bright. Storm Chandler, Smoke said. Locks new. Red grabbed the handle and pulled. The hinges screamed, loud and rusty. Cool, damp air pushed up from below. Cool, bringing the smell of earth, old concrete, damp air pushed up from below. Anyone down there? He flicked on a small flashlight and shined it down concrete steps into the dark. He called. He went anyway. The temperature dropped with every step. The beam of light slid over shelves, lined with dusty jars and cans, a folded cot, a rolled mattress, pipes overhead beaded with condensation. In the far corner, two shapes huddled in on themselves, a woman and a boy. The woman's hair was a tangle of blonde and soot. Ash streaked her shirt. She was pressed back against the wall, arms wrapped so tight around the child he might have been part of her. The boy wore dinosaur pajamas and clutched nothing. She was pressed back against the wall, eyes closed, breathing slow. And even in the dead-weight sleep of exhaustion, Sarah Patterson, Red said, her head snapped up. The light caught wide eyes and a bruise blooming along her cheek. "Don't hurt us," she blurted. Her voice was raw. "Please, we don't have anything, we don't know anything." Red stopped where he was and lifted one hand, palm out. The other stayed near his hip but nowhere near his gun. "Ma'am," he said, "we're not here to hurt you. We're here because your daughter found us." Something flickered behind her eyes. "Emma," she whispered, "she's alive. She is," Red said, "ran herself half to death to get to town. She's with one of my guys now. He's a medic. He's fixing her up." Sarah closed her eyes. Her shoulders sagged like someone cut a string. She dropped her forehead for a second against the boy's hair, breathed in, then looked back up. "My husband," she said. "Daniel, did he?" "Hospital in Helena," Tank answered from the stairs. "Critical but alive." Tears filled her eyes and hung there, notekite falling. She gave the smallest nod, like she was pinning that fact somewhere inside to keep it safe. Red moved closer and dropped into a crouch, getting his eyes level with hers instead of towering over her. "I know you're running on fumes," he said, "but I need you to tell me what happened. Best you can. No rush." Her throat worked as she swallowed. "They came around 3, she said. 5 of them. Masks. Broke the windows. Threw in bottles. I smelled gas before I saw flame." Danielle ran downstairs. I heard him yelling. Then I heard. She winced. He stopped yelling. There were hits. Thuds. I knew. Her gaze drifted past him, seeing smoke instead of concrete. I grabbed Emma. She went on. Told her to run. Road. Town. People. She didn't want to go. She was screaming about her brother, but I pushed her out the door. Tommy started crying upstairs. I thought I had time. Stairs were already burning. He crawled. Felt the wall. Got to his room. Smoke was so thick I couldn't see him. I just followed his voice. Her hand smoothed the boy's hair without her noticing. Window was open. I climbed out with him. I heard men shouting outside. I thought they saw us. I ran for the cellar and shut the door. Haven't come out since. "Did you see faces?" Red asked. "Tattoos. Trucks. Did you see faces?" She shook her head. "Masks," she said. "All black." Her mouth curled bitter. "But I know who sent them." "Marcus Crane," Smoke said quietly. Sarah's eyes snapped to him. "You know about him." "We're getting there." Red said. "Why does he want this place so bad?" "This farm sits on good water," she said. "Deep aquifer. Clean. Crane wants it for some resort crap. Golf course. Vacation homes. All that development garbage. He offered us half what it's worth." Daniel said no. "After that, things just went wrong." "How wrong?" Tank asked. "Our tractor broke twice," she said. "Mechanic finally told us someone dumped sugar in the tank. Irrigation system vandalized. Fences cut. Our dog ate something in the yard and died in front of the kids." Her jaw tightened. Daniel went to the sheriff. Sheriff said he'd look into it. Nothing happened. She looked tired, older than she had any right to at her age. "Daniel called a lawyer from Billings," she said. The guy looked at the bank papers, said they were fake, that Crane was running some shell company scam to make it look like we owed more than we did. He said he could prove it. Week later, his car went off the road. ICE, they said. Wrong place. Wrong night. Her eyes locked on Red's. You still think anyone's gonna help us? She asked. Law. Courts. Police. Crane owns them. He owns everything. Not everything, Red said. Not us. He held out his hand. Come on, he said. We're getting you and the boy out of this hole. After that, we'll talk about what comes next. She stared at his hand for a heartbeat. Who are you people? She whispered. We're the ones who stop, he said. That's enough for today. She shifted Tommy carefully and took his hand. Her grip was cold and shaking, but there was steel under it. Red pulled her to her feet and guided them up the steps. The daylight at the top made Tommy squint and fuss, then burrow deeper into his mother's shoulder. When Sarah stepped out and saw what was left of the house from the outside, she went still. Everything we had, she said softly. Everything. Everything that can be rebuilt. Red said, you and your kids and your husband, that's the part that matters. Maybe she agreed. Maybe she did not. Either way, she moved when he did. They led her toward the bikes. Either way, she said, voice small and flat. First time for everything, Tank said. The line sounded like a joke, but the way he said it was gentle. You ride with me. We keep the little man between us. He'll be safer than anyone coming after us. They settled Tommy on the seat. Sarah wrapped around him, her arms a cage. Her hands clutched Tank's cut like it was the only solid thing left. Red swung onto his Harley. Wolf and Smoke took positions at the rear. Bear slid to the outside to widen their moving shield. They started rolling. As they cleared the Patterson Drive and turned toward the highway, Red glanced into his mirror. Far back down the lane, a black sport utility vehicle eased around the bend and nosed toward the burned house. No siren, no lights, no hurry. It slid onto the property with the quiet confidence of men coming to check whether their work was complete. Wolf's voice snapped over the radio. Red, he said, we've got a visitor. Black SUV. Corporate. Not local. Keep formation. Red said. His voice stayed level, but the wind stole the softness from it. Red said. His voice stayed level. He rolled his wrist. The engine answered with a deeper growl. The others matched him instantly. 6 bikes and 1 shattered family picked up speed, gravel spitting under their tires. As the burned farm shrank behind them, Red kept his eyes on the road ahead. Now he had seen exactly what kind of man Marcus Crane was and what he was willing to burn. And somewhere behind them, in that quiet black SUV, Crane's people had just learned what Red was willing to take from him. The next move was already coming. Red opened the throttle, and they rode straight into it. Red pushed through the glass doors of St. Mary's Hospital with his jaw clenched so tight, the muscles in his neck stood out. The cold afternoon air hit him like a slap, but it didn't cool the burn growing under his ribs. Crane had guards watching Daniel. Crane had people canvassing town, asking about a soot-covered little girl. That meant one thing. He wasn't covering his tracks anymore. He was hunting. Bear fell into step beside him, hands jammed into his jacket pockets, shoulders hunched against the wind. You look like you're about to pull the fire alarm just for something to punch, he muttered. I've got a better idea, Red said. We get back. We fortify that motel, and we put a wall of engines between Crane and those kids. We get back. Good. Red's phone buzzed again, a text this time. Smoke. We're set. Red's phone buzzed again, a text this time. We're set. Doc says, room secure. For the first time in the last hour, Red let out a slow breath. All right, he said. Let's roll. They crossed the parking lot, boots crunching on thin layers of old road salt. The sky was dipping toward evening, gold fading to iron. Red reached for his keys, and then he stopped. Just 5 stalls down from his bike sat a black SUV. Not the same one from the Patterson property. Different plat, different model. But the tint, the stance, the quiet, predatory stillness. It was Crane's kind. His people, his eyes, don't look at it. His people, don't look at it. He didn't have to. He'd felt the shift too, a chill in the air that wasn't weather. You think they followed us? Bear asked. No, Red said. I think Crane's footprint is just bigger than we knew. They mounted up without another word. Engines ripped across the hospital lot in a single lion's roar. Red took point, Bear pulled up behind him, and they tore through Helena like a storm rolling fast across the plains. Wind howled, traffic blurred past, the sky darkened into a thick Montana night. Red leaned into the ride, jaw tight. The sky darkened into a thick Montana night. Crane wasn't waiting for anything. He wasn't hesitating. He wasn't bluffing, which meant Red had to move faster. They reached the motel just after 10 p.m. Smoke and Wolf were outside with a plastic bag full of groceries and a tarp full of clothes. Doc stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes sharp. Everyone accounted for, Doc said. No movement around the lot for the last hour. Good, Red said, but he didn't relax. Not even a little. He stepped into the room. Sarah was awake, sitting on the edge of one of the beds, oil lamp dim beside her, fingers threaded through Emma's hair. Tommy slept curled against his sister like a small, warm cat. Emma looked up. Her eyes were clearer now, less smoke, fingers threaded through Emma's hair. Emma looked up, more steel. Red crouched beside her. He's alive, he said. He's fighting, and we're gonna keep him that way. Emma nodded hard, the way little kids do when they're trying not to cry. Her fingers tightened around the bandaged teddy bear. What happens now? She whispered. Red opened his mouth, but Sarah beat him to it. What happens? She said, voice low, flat. Is you get away from my children. Voice low. You've done enough already. Red stood slowly. Ma'am, with all due respect. No, she snapped. Tears filled her eyes, hot and sharp. You brought them here. If Crane is coming, you brought them here. You're making my family a target. Red didn't raise his voice. He didn't step closer. He just said, Crane already made you a target. The words hit like a stone thrown through a window. Sarah flinched. Emma's eyes widened, then flicked to her mother. Doc broke the silence. She's exhausted, he murmured. Let her cool down. She's been running on terror for 24 hours. Red nodded once. He stepped back toward the door, keeping his voice calm. You get some sleep, he said. We'll take shifts. Sarah didn't answer. She just pulled Tommy closer. Midnight fell like a heavy quilt. The motel lot went silent. Smoke took the first watch, sitting on a plastic chair outside the door with a cigarette burning low between his fingers. Wolf took the perimeter. Tank slept in the parking lot, leaning against his bike like a guard dog in leather. Red sat with his back against the inside of the door, gun holstered but loose, boots planted, eyes closed but not sleeping. He waited for the sound. The one he knew would come. Rain started sometime after 2, slow at first, then steady, then pounding, the kind of Montana rain that smelled like iron and mud. Red cracked an eye. The room was dim, lit only by the lamp on Sarah's nightstand. Emma slept curled around the teddy bear. Sarah lay on her side facing both kids, one hand protectively over them even in sleep. Doc snored softly in the corner chair. Red checked the time on his watch. 47 a.m. Something in his gut tightened. A hunter's instinct, an old battlefield reflex. He straightened. Outside, the rain hit harder. He straightened. A trash bag or a piece of metal siding. Then a shadow shifted under the door. Not a person, not a shape, a presence. Red's hand slid toward his gun. He looked through the peephole. but saw nothing. Wind, rain, silence. He exhaled. Then the window exploded. A single gunshot punched through the glass with the force of a hammer, spraying the room with diamonds of razor-sharp shards. The lamp shattered. The wall cracked. Tommy jolted awake, screaming. Sarah grabbed both kids and dropped to the floor. Just as the second bullet tore across the room, embedding in the headboard inches from where Emma's skull had been. Red was already moving, body low, embedding in the headboard inches from where Emma's skull had been. Red was already moving. He barked, "Everyone down." Now, Wolf's shout came from outside. "We're hit. Multiple hostiles. Move. Move." Red lunged across the room, diving for Sarah and the kids as another round ripped through the curtains. The war Marcus Crane started had finally arrived, and Red met it head-on. The third shot hit the TV and blew its screen apart in a flash of white and sparks. The room went dark, except for the parking lot light bleeding through the shredded curtains. Glass crunched under Red's boots as he dove for the floor. Tommy's scream went shrill and high. Emma's followed half a beat behind. "Bathroom," Red barked. "Now." Sarah did not argue. She grabbed both kids in one motion, one arm around Emma, the other scooping Tommy, and half crawled, half dragged them across the carpet. Bullets tore through the wall over their heads, spitting drywall dust down like snow. The bathroom door slammed. The thin lock clicked. "Stay low," Red shouted. "Get in the tub and do not open that door unless it's my voice. You hear me?" A muffled "okay" came back, tight and terrified. Outside, engines roared, tires squealed. The sharp stutter of automatic fire cracked across the lot. Wolf's voice punched through the chaos from outside. "North side, 3 vehicles." He yelled, "They're not here to talk." Red flattened himself against the wall beneath what used to be the window. He peered over the edge of the mattress just long enough to catch a glimpse outside. 3 dark SUVs, in a shallow V, doors open, men using them as cover. Muzzle flashes sparked in the night. Smoke was pinned behind the Coke machine, firing controlled bursts between the vending slots. Wolf hugged the corner of the next room, returning fire in quick, economical shots. Tank rolled from behind one bike to another, using the engines as partial cover, his own gun barking in answer. "Doc," Red shouted. "Here." Doc came up on the far side of the bed, low and steady, a gun in his hand and his medic bag slung crosswise over his shoulder. "You hit?" Red asked. "Not yet." "Good. You're evac." Doc's eyes flicked toward the bathroom door. "With them?" "Yeah." Another round smashed through the open window frame, splintering the dresser. A picture frame fell and shattered. Cheap glass. Joining the glittering mess on the carpet, Red's brain ran numbers faster than the bullets. 3 SUVs. At least 8 shooters. Maybe 10. They had 6 men, and a motel that was one step above cardboard. They could not win a siege, so they would not fight one. He keyed his radio with one hand, keeping the other on his weapon. "Everyone listen up," he snapped. "We do this in one push. Ready?" Tank grunted. "Say the word." Smoke said. "Make it good." Wolf added, "Doc, when I say go, you get Sarah and the kids out the back door." Red said. "Head for the truck we parked behind the dumpster. Keys are in the visor. You drive north. Do not stop. Do not look back." Doc's jaw tightened. "What about you?" "We draw them away," Red said. "They want us more than they want a woman and 2 kids. You can't know that." "I can make it true," Red said. "They see our backs. They'll chase. They want the people who embarrass their boss. Not a messy triple homicide on foreign soil." Doc stared at him for a beat. "They want the people who embarrass their boss." "Copy." Red clicked back to the main channel. "Bear." "Copy. Copy. Present." Two down over here. They tried to flank the other side. Good. Red said, you're with Tank. On my go. You two give us enough noise to make them duck. Smoke. Wolf. You cover the rear once Doc is moving. We peel to the bikes, pull them toward the road. Copy. Bear's voice came through loud. You're making this up as you go. That's what I do. Red replied. Another volley shredded the doorframe. Red could hear footsteps on the walkway outside. Heavy boots thudding closer. Positions, he said. This is about to get stupid. He took a breath. The motel air thick with gunpowder and cheap air freshener. Go, he said. Bear and Tank opened up first. Gunfire ripped from their rooms in a violent burst. Bullets, chewing through thin walls, taking out the lights over the walkway, turning the neat line of motel doors into splintered wood and noise. Outside, the attackers flinched. Even trained shooters duck when death suddenly comes from 3 directions. Smoke popped up from behind the vending machine and dropped one of the men by the SUVs. Wolf nailed another who made the mistake of standing to run to better cover. Red spun toward the bathroom. Duck, he barked. Now, the door flew open. Sarah's face was white, but her eyes were clear. Emma had both arms wrapped around Tommy. The door flew open. Go, Red said. Emma had both arms wrapped around Tommy. Foam and springs tore from the frame. He muscled it up against the window at an angle. Red said, grabbing the thin mattress off the closest bed and yanking it hard. Stay below that line. Doc herded Sarah and the kids toward the back of the room, where a second door led to a narrow back corridor and an emergency exit. Red moved with them long enough to slam that door behind them, shoving a chair under the knob, as a useless but satisfying gesture. Bear, Red yelled into his radio. Status. Still breathing. Bear shouted back. They don't like being shot at. Good. Red said, let's give them a reason to hate it. He broke for the front. Red said. He felt the air around him change. Bear shouted back. The second he stepped into the blown-out frame of the window, he dropped just as a burst stitched the wall above where his head had been. Instinct screamed. Concrete dust rained down his neck, came up behind the low brick wall that marked the edge of the walkway, and fired 3 quick shots at the nearest SUV. One hit the front tire. The vehicle sagged slightly. Finish that tire, Wolf shouted. Tank oublié. Picking off the second front tire with 2 clean rounds. The SUV lurched as its nose dropped. We're not gonna win a shootout. Smoke barked. We either move or dehere. Red knew that already. On me, he yelled. To the bikes. He broke from cover and sprinted. The parking lot erupted. Bullets slapped the asphalt around his boots. Bits of tar jumping up like angry gnats. He heard Bear's roar behind him, felt more than saw Tank laying down covering fire. Heard Wolf swearing into the night as he moved. One of the gunmen tried to cut them off between the cars and the bikes. Smoke hit him center mass. The man dropped and did not move again. Red reached his Harley and kicked it to life in one smooth, practiced motion, the engine roaring up into a throaty scream. Go! 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 He shouted. Tank straddled his bike. Bear swung onto his. Wolf and Smoke mounted up, still firing one-handed as engines roared. Behind the motel, a truck engine turned over, Doc making his move with the family. A brief, fierce satisfaction flashed through Red. Then he saw the SUVs move. 2 of them peeled away from the motel, front ends dipping as they shot forward, tires spinning. One stayed, men using it as a base of fire to keep the motel pinned. They're taking the bait, Wolf said. 2 on us. Good, Red said. Let's make them chase something they can't catch. They shot out of the lot as a pack. Engine is screaming. 2 on us. He wanted the attackers to see them. Want us, he thought. Want us so bad you forget everything else. The night swallowed them, he thought. Then to smoother highway. The rain came sideways now. Then to smoother highway. The world narrowed to the twin cones of light, cutting through darkness, and the angry glow of two sets of headlights behind them. Incoming's closing, Smoke said. They're not shy about speed. Good, Red said. Tank, you and Bear take the west turnoff. Wolf, Smoke, you go east at the second split. I'll lead them up the middle. We rendezvous at the old lumber mill if we all live long enough. Copy, Tank said. You always pick the fun routes. Wolf muttered. Red spotted the first fork a heartbeat before they hit it, a barely marked farm road veering away from the main strip. Tank and Bear broke left, taillights disappearing into the dark. One SUV jerked hard after them, almost losing control before recovering. Red throttled up. One SUV stayed on him. Wolf and Smoke flanked him just long enough to reach the second split, then peeled off right, gravel spitting under their tires. The third SUV hesitated, then followed them, Greed, splitting the pack. That left Red with one angry truck on his back. Just you and me now, he muttered. Rain hammered the pavement. The road ahead narrowed. Climbing, he recognized the curve of it, an old logging route he'd scouted earlier in the week. Just killing time. He had not planned on using it like this. He took the turn onto the logging road without slowing, bike bucking under him as he hit ruts and potholes. Trees closed in on both sides, branches whipping at his shoulders and helmet. Behind him, the SUV tried to follow. Too wide, too heavy, too fast. Red heard the screech of metal on bark, the slam of steel into something solid. He risked a glance back and saw the vehicle wedged between two trunks, front end crumpled, wheels spinning uselessly. He did not stop to enjoy it. The slam of steel into something solid. When he finally coasted to a stop in a clearing, the rain had softened to a steady hiss. He rode until the roar of the stuck engine faded behind him, and the only sound left was his Harley and the panting of his own breath. He sat there in the dark, chest heaving, hands tight on the bars, listening. No engines, no gunfire, just forest, just rain. Doc's voice crackled in his ear. Truck's clear, he said. We're northbound. No tails. Steam rose from the bike in thin white ribbons. But they're alive. Red closed his eyes for 1 second. Keep going, he said. Kids are scared. We'll peel the wolves off the trail. He opened his eyes again, the hunter awake and fully present. Marcus Crane had brought war to their door. Red had just made sure the first round did not go the way Crane wanted. But the man was still out there. He still had money. Soldiers. Reach. This was just the opening volley. Red turned his bike toward the thin strip of road that would take him back toward town, back toward his brothers, back toward the man who thought he owned this county. The night around him felt sharp and electric. This fight was not over. It had barely begun. The old lumber mill sat like a dead animal at the edge of town. Concrete bones, rusted ribs, broken windows for eyes. Red rolled his bike in under the half-collapsed awning and killed the engine. Thunder faded from the trees, leaving just the drip of rain off twisted metal and the echo of his own heartbeat. Tank and Bear were already there, bikes lined up, facing the door like they were standing guard, leaving just the drip of rain off twisted metal and the echo of his own heartbeat, engines growling low before they cut. For a few seconds, no one talked. Engines growling low before they cut, listening for engines that did not come. Then Bear huffed. Broken windows for eyes, he said. Everyone's still breathing. That's something. Doc, everyone's still breathing. Engines growling low before they cut. They just stood there in the dark skeleton of that building, northbound. Doc's voice came through. Well, not tails, crossing state lines in 10. Kids are asleep. Sarah's not, but she's trying. Red let out a breath he'd been holding since the first shot. Good. It crackled to life. Keep going. Find a quiet place and disappear for a few days. We'll call when it's safe enough to talk names again. Faint and full of road noise. Doc repeated. That's still a thing. Working on it. Faint and full of road noise. They looked like hell. Wet leather. Smeared soot. Glass cuts. The wild, bright eyes of people who'd been shooting their way out of a cheap motel at 3 in the morning. You two lose anybody? He asked Wolf and Smoke. Just pride, Wolf said, and maybe some hearing. Smoke jerked his chin back the way they'd come. They're not cops, he said. Whoever Crane hired, they're comfortable with shooting up family motels. That tells you what we're working with. Red already knew. He leaned back against a cracked concrete pillar. The mill smelled like wet dust and mold. Old oil trapped in the floor. Outside, the rain softened to a steady hiss. All right, he said. We just went up a level. Crane sent a crew to wipe us, and the witness off the map. We peeled them off the family. That buys us a little time. Not a lot. Tank raked a hand over his face. So what now, boss? Because we can't just keep dancing in circles until we run out of gas. Red's phone vibrated in his pocket. He checked the screen. Marguerite Chen. He answered. Yeah. You're alive. He answered. Her voice was tight, wired on caffeine and adrenaline. I wasn't sure. They're saying a lot of things on the scanner. What are they saying? Red asked. That there was a shootout at a roadside motel. That a known motorcycle gang engaged in gunfire with unknown assailants. That you kidnapped a woman and her 2 children. Bear snorted. Nice, he muttered. We saved them. He calls it a kidnapping. Margaret barreled on. My story went live at midnight, she said. Front page online. We put everything we had in it. Fire, threats, land fraud, pressure on the sheriff's office. I thought maybe, for once, the truth would actually matter. The way she said it told Red what came next. It didn't. He asked. Oh, it mattered, she said. To the wrong people. Crane's lawyers pushed for an emergency hearing. Judge, I've never even heard of. Granted bail. $2 million. Crane's lawyers pushed for an emergency hearing. Posted before dawn. He walked out the front door before sunup. Red closed his eyes briefly. He could see it in his head too clearly. Crane, in a suit that cost more than this whole mill. Sunglasses on. Smiling for the cameras. There's more, Margaret said. The state investigator I told you about. The one in the Attorney General's office. She was in a car accident 2 hours after my piece went live. She's in a coma now. They're calling it a collision with a drunk driver. Witnesses say the other car never stopped. The mill felt colder. And, Margaret added, there's a bulletin out on you. All of you. Red's voice stayed even. There's a bulletin out on you. All of you. What kind of bulletin? What kind of bulletin? Federal Task Force. Crane's lawyers are framing you as vigilantes who kidnap families, attack hospitals, shoot up motels, and interfere with ongoing investigations. Tank laughed once, humorless. We miss a bank robbery or two while we were at it, he asked. So, short version. Red said into the phone. We embarrassed Crane. He walked. The one honest investigator is on life support, and now we're the bad guys. Welcome to my world, Margaret said. Truth is optional. Money isn't. Red's jaw ticked. Where are you? At home? She said. I'm packing a bag. I figure I've got 2 options. Run or double down. Running suits you, Red asked. She didn't answer. That told him enough. Stay put, he said. Lock your doors. We'll come to you as soon as we can. You have bigger problems than me, she said. Crane has hurt a lot of families. They'll be next. His style is predictable. Prosperity for the chosen few. Scorched earth for everyone else. Red glanced at his crew. They were watching him, waiting for his decision. "How many families?" he asked. "At least 20 I know by name," Margaret said. "People he pressured, ruined, forced off their land or out of their homes. Some left the state. Some are still here, scarred, tired. One bad phone call from giving up. Get me their names," Red said. "Addresses, numbers, everything you've got. Start with the ones who are still here." "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Same thing we always do," Red said. "Stop when everyone else keeps driving." The Henderson place sat out on a wind-swept stretch of county road. A little two-story farmhouse with peeling paint and a porch swing tapping softly in the breeze. Red was already in the ditch across the street when the first car pulled in. Tank lay belly down beside him, binoculars pressed to his face. Bear crouched behind a tree, big frames squeezed in just enough to make use of the trunk as cover. "Not locals," Tank murmured. "Out-of-state plates. Rental." The sedan rolled to a stop in front of the house. Two men got out. Both wore dark jackets. Caps pulled low, hands empty but posture wrong. Too relaxed. Too loose. A second car pulled in behind the first. Another two men, same uniform. "4," Bear said. "Safe number for a quiet kill." The Hendersons, couple in their 60s, opened the front door before anyone could knock. Red could see Mr. Henderson's shoulders slump when he spotted the men. No surprise, just a tired dread. One of the suited men held up a badge-shaped thing. Red was too far to read it, but he could guess. Friendly. Official-looking. Probably very polite. "Time?" Red asked. Tank checked his watch. "They were third on the list Margaret sent." He said, "If we are right about the order, they're not here to talk." Red finished. He keyed his radio. "Wolf. Smoke. Backside," he said. "Smoke. Backside. Crawling through a windbreak of old pines." "Copy," Wolf answered. "Copy." One of the men in the fake badge stepped forward, hand out like a salesman at a convention. Mr. Henderson stepped onto the porch. Red moved. He was up and out of the ditch in a run before Henderson's hand even lifted. Tank and Bear burst from their cover a half step behind him. "Hey!" Red's voice cracked across the yard like a rifle shot. "Conference is cancelled. Boys." 4 heads snapped in their direction. Fake badge guy's hand went for his hip. He never got there. Red hit him mid-chest, full speed, driving him back into the side of the car. The man's skull bounced off the metal with a hollow thunk. His gun skittered across the driveway. Bear met the second man like a wrecking ball, one arm hooking his neck and slamming him face first into the wooden porch column. The post cracked. Bear met the second man like a wrecking ball. Tank took the men from the rear car, 1 to 2, his fists and elbows moving like he was knocking dents out of a fender. One of them swung wildly, caught Tank on the jaw. Tank answered with a knee to the gut that knocked the wind and fight out of him both. Wolf appeared from around the back corner, gun drawn but not firing yet. Smoke came behind him, covering the yard. It was over in less than 8 seconds. "Mrs." Henderson stood on the porch with one hand over her mouth, eyes huge. "Mr." Henderson's chest heaved. "Who the hell?" "Friends," Red said. "Who the hell?" Breathing hard. "You can yell at me later. Right now, we need to know if they came alone." Tank was already patting down pockets. "Bingo," Tank said, pulling out a folded paper from fake badge guy's jacket. He opened it, skin around his eyes tightening as he read. He handed it to Red. 23 names, addresses, phone numbers, headed by a single line at the top. Priority 1. Chen. Margaret. Red felt something go cold inside him. Henderson was third on the list. Someone had drawn a line through the first 2 names in neat, precise ink. "How many of these people are in this county?" Red asked. "Most," Tank said. "Some scribbled notes. Vacated. Foreclosed. Move, Ed. End. Red folded the paper and slid it into his pocket. Do you have kids? Mrs. Henderson asked quietly, eyes shining, because Crane said, "We know what he said." Red cut in gently, "And we're not letting it happen. Pack a bag. Essentials only. You're leaving. Don't argue." To where? Mr. Henderson asked, dazed. Church basement in town, Red said. Margaret knows the place. Neutral ground. We'll get as many of you in one spot as we can. Safety in numbers. Harder to pick you off that way. He keyed his phone and hit Margaret's number. It rang. Once. Twice. 3 times. Come on, Red muttered. 4 rings. Come on. Voicemail. He hung up and called again. Same thing. No answer. Tank watched his face. Problem? He asked. She's first on the list, Red said. Voice gone flat. Hendersons are third. We got here just in time for them. He looked at the unconscious men on the driveway. We might be too late for her. The wind picked up, rattling the porch swing against the siding. Clouds rolled over the sun, dimming the light. Red made the call. Bear, Tank, secure these 4, and get the Hendersons ready to move. He said, Wolf, Smoke, with me. Where? Wolf asked. To Margaret's, Red said, and we take all the lights and sirens in the world with us, if we have to. He headed for his bike, walking fast, and we take all the lights and sirens in the world with us, if we have to. And somewhere in town, a woman who believed in the truth might already be bleeding on the floor of her own home. Red swung into the saddle and kicked his Harley to life. The engine roared, loud enough to scare birds out of the trees. Hang on, Margaret, he said under his breath, as the front wheel bit into gravel and launched them forward. We're coming. Red sat upright on the edge of the motel bed long before dawn, awake but not rested, the room still spinning with the ghosts of last night's escape. His phone vibrated once against the nightstand. The sound cut through the quiet like a blade. He answered without looking at the screen. Sarah's voice came through, cracked and jagged, torn raw by panic. Red. They took her. They took Emma. The words punched the air out of him. Not loud, not violent, just a slow, crushing pressure, the kind that turned bone to dust from the inside. Tell me what happened, he said, already knowing the shape of the nightmare before she described it. They came through the window. 3 men. Masks. They came through the window. They grabbed her and dragged her out. They said, Mr. Crane is waiting. Red. She was screaming your name. They took her across the border. The police here say they cannot do anything yet. It was the silence after she finished speaking that scared Wolf and Smoke and Tank and Bear the most. Red did not rage, did not curse, did not throw anything. He simply exhaled once, long and controlled, the way a man does when the world decides to cross a line that cannot be uncrossed. Stay inside that station, he told her. Do not leave with anyone, not even police. Keep Tommy close. He hung up. The crew waited. None of them spoke until Red finally lifted his eyes. Crane took Emma, Red said. His voice had no tremor and no mercy. That was the moment they all understood. The rules had changed. Red called in the one favor he had left in the world. A federal agent named Jackson Reeves, a man who owed him his life. The conversation was short and low and sharp. Jackson dug through records and databases and offshore companies until he found it. A compound in the mountains. A building registered to a shell corporation whose taxes Crane paid like clockwork. No utilities, no public access. A private fortress carved into the edge of a ridge with a single road leading up to it like a thread to a needle. Jackson gave coordinates, then he gave a warning. There is a federal warrant out for you, and every man riding with you, Jackson said. Terror charges, kidnapping, murder. If any officer sees you, they will take the shot. Crane made that happen overnight. Red did not flinch. "Hey, took my kid," he said. "That makes everything else noise." The sky was still black when they saddled their bikes and rode toward the mountains. The air grew colder and thinner the higher they climbed. Pines rose like black towers on both sides of the road. Snow dusted the shoulders. The wind carried the kind of silence that only deep wilderness could hold. The compound came into view just as the horizon lifted into the faintest gray. Red signaled with 2 fingers, and the crew dropped into formation. They killed their engines half a mile from the gate and rolled the last stretch on gravity alone, letting the darkness swallow the sound of their approach. The place was worse than the satellite pictures. Concrete walls 20 feet high, barbed wire, a steel gate with fresh welds, 2 guards out front with rifles, and the bored heaviness of men who believed no one would ever come this far to challenge them. Red gave Wolf a look. "Showtime," he whispered. Wolf revved his bike loud and stupid and rolled straight toward the gate, waving like a lost tourist looking for a fishing cabin. It drew the guards' eyes exactly the way Red needed. While they shouted at Wolf to turn around, Red and the others moved through the trees to the side of the structure, slipping like shadows between the trunks. Tank and Bear found a service door near the back, locked by a keypad. Smoke pulled a black box from his pocket, clipped it to the panel, and in under 10 seconds, the light flicked green. They slipped inside. The hallway was long and cold, smelling faintly of bleach and rust. Fluorescent strips hummed overhead. Behind one of the closed doors came the faint sound of a man talking. Behind another, the soft metallic click of a rifle being cleaned. Then they heard it, a small, thin voice drifting from farther down the hall, a whimper pressed under the weight of fear. Red froze. His heart stopped. There was only that sound. "Doc, Wolf, with me," he whispered. They reached the door. Red looked through the small wired glass. 2 men, one sitting, one standing, and in the corner on a thin mattress, one sitting. Hair tangled with fear and exhaustion, sat Emma Patterson. Red did not think. He broke the door in with one hit. The frame cracked. The latch snapped. The man closest to the door flew backward as Red smashed him into the wall. The other reached for his weapon, but Wolf dropped him before he cleared the holster. Doc ran straight to Emma. The second she saw him, she burst into tears and threw her bound hands toward him. "Doc," she gasped, "you found me, always," he said. His voice was gentle, but his hands were fast. He cut her restraints and lifted her into his arm. Alarms erupted. Red did not care. The world could burn behind him. Emma clung to Doc's neck, trembling. The world could burn behind him. They ran for the exit. Gunshots cracked through the building. Red fired twice down the hallway to keep pursuers back. Tank and Bear killed the exterior lights. The building plunged into red emergency glow. Smoke held their exit door open and covered the yard with rapid, accurate bursts. Outside, trucks roared to life. Engines thundered. Men shouted. Doc put Emma on his bike and climbed on behind her, bracing her small hands against the handlebars. "Hold on tight," he said. "I will," she whispered. The trucks barreled toward them, headlights swinging across the yard like hunting lamps, searching for prey. Red hit the throttle. The crew shot away from the building in a burst of speed. The trucks closed fast. Red cut left, then right, then saw what he needed. A thin break in the trees, an old logging trail carved into the mountain decades ago. Narrow, steep, washed out. No truck could follow without flipping. No sane biker would touch it. Red went for it. The trail dropped under the tires like a cliff. Mud and rock sprayed behind him. His back wheel fish-tailed wildly. Branches whipped his arms. Stones rattled under the tires. The bikes groaned, frames straining, engine screaming. The bikes groaned, frames straining, nearly tossing them both. Doc steadied it with a violent jerk and shouted over his shoulder, "I have you! I have you!" Behind them, a truck attempted the turn. Metal shrieked, tires spun. The vehicle slammed sideways into the trees, pinned between two trunks, helpless and furious. Red kept going. Mudsprayed, Enginis droated. Hurt pounded. The mountain tried to throw them off. Crane's men tried to kill them. Red refused to stop for either. At the end of the trail, where the ridge met a narrow gravel road, Red pulled his bike to a skid and looked back at the dark line they had just survived. Emma lifted her head from Doc's back, eyes wide with terror and unsteady hope. "Red Meterhaze, you are safe now, sweetheart," he said. "We are not done fighting, but we have you back." And with that truth burning through him like fire, he turned his bike toward the long road ahead. The war was far from over, but as long as Emma breathed, Red was not done. Red did not let the engines cool for long. They hit pavement at the bottom of the mountain, tires jumping from rock to asphalt, and rode in tight formation until the trees thinned and an old rest stop appeared on the right. The place was half swallowed by weeds. A cracked concrete lot, crooked picnic table, and a rusted soda machine slumped against a graffiti-stained wall. Red raised his hand, and the bikes rolled to a stop. Doc killed his engine first. Emma slid down from the seat, her legs wobbling under her. Her fingers were welded around the burned teddy bear he had managed to snatch from that concrete cell, its fur charred and one eye gone. The cold air turned her breaths into little ghosts. Red stepped off his Harley and walked over, the gravel crunching under his boots. He crouched until his eyes were level with hers. "You hurt anywhere, sweetheart?" he asked. She shook her head, a small jerky motion. Her knuckles were white where they gripped the ruined bear. Her eyes were too big for her face, lids swollen from tears. She did not seem to have the strength to finish. "You scared?" he asked. She nodded once, chin trembling. "Me too," he said quietly. That made her look up. "You are not scared of anything," she whispered. He gave the smallest of smiles. "That is not how it works," he said. "Brave is when you are scared, and you do it anyway." She soaked that in like dry ground taking rain. Something in her shoulders changed, not relaxed, but set. Red straightened, the decision already made and welded into him. "Doc is taking you back to your mom," he said. "Straight to the station in Maple Ridge. No stops, no shortcuts. You stay with her. No shortcuts." Emma swallowed hard. "What about you?" she asked. "We are going back south," he said. "There is a man who thinks he owns the land and the law and the air people breathe. We are going to show him he does not." She hugged the bear tighter. "Will he come after me again?" she asked. Red did not lie to children. He had seen what lies did. "He will try," he said, "but he is going to have to get through a lot of people to do it. Your mama, the officers up there, a federal agent who owes me a favor, and me. And by the time we are done, he will not have the power to scare anybody ever again." She stared at him for a long moment, like she was memorizing him, building an internal picture she could keep when he was gone. "You promised you would not leave me alone," she whispered. "I am not," Red said. "You are not alone anymore." She stepped forward suddenly and wrapped her arms around his neck with surprising strength. "Come back," she said into his jacket. "Always," he answered. When he pulled back, his throat felt tight. He turned to Doc. "Border," Red said. "Station. Then you stay put with them until I call. You hear me?" Doc nodded once. No argument, no heroics. He understood what was riding on that little girl better than most. Emma climbed onto his bike. No heroics. Small back pressed to his chest, his arms bracketing her as he took the bars. He snapped his helmet onto her head, tightening the strap under her chin until she made a face. "You are safe," he said to her softly. Hold on. She twisted at the waist, just enough to look over her shoulder at Red one more time. He lifted 2 fingers off his grip in a lazy salute. He called Margaret Chen, hand shaking but intent clear. Doc fired up the engine. He called Margaret Chen and rode away. Red watched until the sound of the motor faded into the trees. The empty space where the bike had been felt like a pulled tooth. Tank broke the silence first. So, boss, he said, now what? We keep dodging warrants and hoping he gets bored. Red slid his phone from his pocket. No, he said. Now we stop playing his game and make him play ours. He called Margaret Chen. She answered on the second ring. Now we stop playing his game and make him play ours. She answered on the second ring. Turned north. Tell me, she is safe. She will be, Red said. Doc is taking her to her mother now. They will be under Canadian protection before the day is done. He heard her exhale, a shaky release of breath. Crane is not slowing down, Margaret said. He went on local television last night. Called you a violent gang, manipulating a traumatized child. Said you are shaking him down. People are buying it. He still owns the cameras. Not all of them, Red said. You still have one. There was a rustle of paper on her end, the tap of keys. What are you thinking? She asked. I am thinking we have his voice threatening Daniel Patterson, bragging about owning the county, Red said. We have a list of families he has hurt. We have a town that has suspected the truth for years and felt powerless. And we have you with a platform and no quit in your spine. So we stop swinging in the dark. We hit him where he lives. In public, Margaret went key. He is holding a press conference tomorrow, she said after a moment. Courthouse lawn. He is announcing some development project, talking about jobs and prosperity. Every local politician will be there trying to look important. Every camera too. Red could almost see Crane in his mind. Sweet pressed, smile polished, standing at a podium built on the ruins of other people's lives. Perfect, Red said. You want to crash it, Margaret said. It was not really a question. We are going to let him sell his story, Red said. Then we are going to let everyone hear the real one. Daniel's recorder, patched into his own sound system, his voice confessing while he is standing 3 feet from a microphone he cannot control. You will never get near the board, she said. Security will be tight. They are already jumpy after what happened at the meat plant. They will be looking for you. We do not need the stage, Red said. We just need his cables. Smoke used to run sound for bands. If there is a wire, he can talk to it. Outside the window of whatever motel room she was in, he could hear distant traffic and the muffled life of the town going on like none of this was happening. You understand what this means for you, Margaret said. If you show your face on that lawn with a federal warrant on your head, they can put you down and call it justice. If we do this right, Red said, they will not be able to pull a trigger without half the country watching. Crane has been winning because he scares people in the dark. We drag him into the light. He is just another rich punk with a bad suit. Silence again. Then a low laugh. You are insane, she said, and this might actually work. We will meet you before the show, Red said. Somewhere off the main drag. Bring whatever you have on those families. We may need them sooner than we think. He hung up. They rode south. The diner they chose was just far enough out of town to feel forgotten. A squat building with tired neon and coffee that tasted like it had been sitting on a hot plate since the previous week. Margaret sat in a back booth, laptop open, pages of notes spread under her hands. Bruises still colored her jaw and temple, faint yellow and green. She saw them and stood, relief and worry tangling on her face. You made it, she said. Then, before she could stop herself, you look like hell. Red glanced at the men behind him, all of them streaked with dried mud and road grit, and a kind of exhaustion that did not show in their posture but lived in their eyes. "It has been a long week," he said. They sat. Margaret turned the laptop so Red could see. Names filled the screen, each with a brief note. Farm-sized, business bankrupted, permits revoked, house condemned after suspicious fire. "These are the ones who agreed to talk on camera," she said. 14 families. Others are gone or too scared. I can get statements from them in time for trial. But public testimony is going to be harder. "We start with what we have," Red said. "Once they hear Crane dig his own grave with that recording, more will find their courage." He set Daniel's recorder on the table between them. It looked small and harmless, like a toy. Margaret stared at it, with the kind of focus usually reserved for loaded weapons. "You really think you can patch this into his podium?" she asked Smoke. Smoke leaned over, studying the device and the chords she had sketched on a napkin, mapping how the courthouse soundboard would likely be wired. "Give me 5 minutes in their audio tent," he said. "If they are using anything even halfway standard, I can slip this in line. They will think their mic cut out. If they are using anything even halfway standard," Margaret pictured it, eyes sharpening. "The crowd hears him say he owns the county," she murmured. Then they look up at the man on the stage pretending to be their savior. "The crowd hears him say he owns the county." Exactly. And while they are doing that, you point your camera at the families in the front row. People need to see their faces, see who he actually hurt. She nodded slowly, absorbing the choreography of it. Red finished his coffee and slid out of the booth. The men followed. They walked to the glass front of the diner. From there they could see the hill where the courthouse stood, brick and stone against the winter-pale sky. Workers moved like ants on the lawn, setting up a stage and rows of folding chairs. Metal barricades lined the sidewalk. Deputies in uniform checked exits. Beyond the official vehicles, 2 black sport utility trucks sat nose to nose by a side entrance. Dark windows, engines idling with quiet menace. Red did not look at the podium. He looked at the barricades, at the uniforms, at the unmarked trucks waiting like patient sharks. He felt no flutter of panic now, no choke of doubt, just a hard, clean line inside him, running straight from that diner floor to Emma Patterson's face in a concrete room. "All right," he said to the men at his back, "let us go crash his party." By the time Red reached the courthouse lawn, the crowd had already formed a loose ring around the temporary stage. The air smelled like cold metal and coffee and damp grass. Camera tripods stabbed up toward a pale sky. Microphones sprouted from the podium like black flowers. Crane's banner hung behind the stage, a glossy print of blueprints and smiling families, with bold letters promising renewal and growth. Red saw the words and thought of scorched timber and a little girl clutching a burned bear. He parked half a block away. The bikes staggered along the curb like sleeping animals. Bear, tank, bear, wolf, and smoke fanned out without needing directions. Wolf. Margaret stood near the front, camera already rolling, then walked in with his jacket zipped and his chin down. She jerked her chin to the left, the flicker of recognition there and gone before anyone else could follow her gaze. "You are late," she murmured when he drew close enough. He glanced at the stage. "He is not talking yet." Red said, "Where is the sound tent?" Her press badge, hanging from a worn lanyard. A white canopy behind the stage. Cables running out from it to speakers and microphones. "Smoke is already in," she added. "Said to tell you if he is not out by the time Crane hits the podium, he is staying put." Red looked past her shoulder. Beyond the barricades, the sheriff stood with his deputies, one hand resting on his belt, eyes scanning the crowd. He looked tired, older than the last time Red had seen him. like the last few days had taken years instead of hours. Red moved closer until he was within 3 steps of the sheriff. "You see those cameras?" Red said quietly, not looking directly at him. The sheriff stiffened. "You should not be here," he muttered. "There is a warrant with your name on it that came from higher up than my badge." Red kept his gaze on the stage. "Then maybe you ought to wait before you try to serve it," Red said, "because in about 10 minutes, those cameras are going to hear something you have ignored for 2 years. The sheriff's jaw tightened. "If this is some stunt," he said, "it will not save you." "If this is a stunt," Red said, "walk me out in cuffs yourself. If it is not, maybe you finally find your spine about that man on the stage." He did not wait for an answer. He stepped back into the crowd and planted himself where Crane would not be able to avoid his face if he looked down. Music started piping out of the speakers, something bright and forgettable. People shifted, tugging jackets tighter against the chill. Reporters tested their microphones. A murmur of anticipation rolled through the lawn like a low tide. Under the white tent, smoke moved with the familiar grace of someone who had once lived in cables and soundboards. He wore a borrowed crew vest Margaret had scrounged for him. Under the white tent, the 2 actual techs were too busy fussing over the podium mic to do more than nod at him. He knelt beside the board, tracing lines with his eyes. Input channels, output sends, main mix, house speakers. He found the master bus, followed the cable feeding it. When no one was looking, he slipped the recorder cord from his sleeve, plugged it into an open channel, and patched that channel into the main. He tested the connection with his thumb on the tiny recorder button. The level meter jumped green. He muted it again, heart ticking fast but hands steady. Back on the lawn, the music cut off. A public relations voice drifted through the speakers, practiced and smooth, introducing Marcus Crane as a visionary, a benefactor, a man who had given more to this county than anyone in recent memory. Red felt his teeth grind. Then Crane stepped up. He wore a charcoal suit that looked like it had never seen a wrinkle. His silver hair was perfect, his tie the exact shade of his banner. He moved with the ease of a man who had spent his life on stages like this, talking people into believing their own betrayal was a bargain. "Thank you," he began, smiling as cameras flashed. "Thank you all for coming today." His voice rolled over the lawn, amplified and warm. He spoke of opportunity and partnership, of revitalizing the community, of bringing jobs and infrastructure to places forgotten by time. He talked about families and futures and dreams. Red watched faces change in the crowd. Some were hard, skeptical. Some were hopeful against their better judgment. Some were just tired, clinging to any promise that sounded like a way out. Crane kept talking. He mentioned vague rumors and unfortunate incidents, brushed them aside like gnats. Of course, in any ambitious plan, brush them aside like gnats. Of course, there will be misunderstandings. But let me be clear. I have always acted in the best interest of this county. That is your cue. Red thought. Inside the sound tent, Smoke saw the same beat in the speech. The place where Crane shifted from fluff to defense. He slid his finger to the mute button for the podium mic and took a breath. "Do not miss," he whispered to himself, and hit the switch. On the stage, Crane kept speaking, but no sound came out. He frowned, tapping the microphone. "Can we get this checked?" he said, half turned toward the tent. His words died unheard. A different voice poured from the speakers instead, half turned toward the tent, meaner, stripped of polish. "Mr. Patterson, I am going to make this very simple." The lawn froze. The crowd went silent in an instant, the way people do when something suddenly feels wrong in a way their bodies register before their brains. Red watched Crane's face drain of color. "I am offering you a way out," the recorded voice went on. "You sell me your land for the price I am offering, or I make your life hell." Heads turned from the stage to the speakers, to each other. Confusion rippled through the crowd. "I have done it before. I will do it again. And nobody, not the sheriff, not the courts, not anyone, will stop me." Margaret's camera stayed locked on Crane. The red record light burned at the top. She did not blink. She knew this was the moment everything turned. On the edge of the crowd, a woman gasped loudly enough to carry. "That is his voice," she said, hand covering her mouth. Her face crumpled with recognition. "That is what he said to my husband." Another man near the front stepped forward, fists clenched at his sides. "That is the same line," he growled. "Those are the same word." Crane grabbed the dead microphone. "This is a fabrication," he shouted, his own unamplified voice thin and strained. "This is a manufactured tape, meant to smear my reputation. I will not stand for—" The recording kept talking over him, implacable. "I own this county. I own the people in it. And soon I will own your land, one way or another." The sheriff's eyes snapped from the speakers to Crane and back. Something in his face shifted. The deputies around him straightened, hands hovering near their cuffs instead of their radios now. The deputies around him straightened. The deputies around him straightened. Smoke stepped into his path, pretending to fumble with a cable, buying seconds. The tape rolled on. Threats, dates, mention of timed fires and fake accidents. Red watched the crowd transform. The uncertainty curdled into anger, into realization, into a shared understanding that the man in the suit had been playing them all for fools and victims. The recorder clicked off with a soft mechanical stop. The last words hung in the air like smoke. "Nobody will stop me." Silence followed. Then a child began to cry near the front. Somewhere else, a woman sobbed once, deep and broken. Marcus Crane opened his mouth. "I do not know where that came from," he said. "These are lies. This is some criminal gang using—" Red stepped forward then, up to the very edge of the front row, where everyone could see him, jacket unzipped, eyes steady, hands empty. "That is your voice, Marcus," he called, loud enough without a microphone. "And those people out there know it. You threatened them. You burned their homes. You beat their husbands. That is who you are." Crane's gaze locked on him like a weapon. "You," he spat, "you and your band of thugs. You are a domestic terror cell. You kidnapped a child to extort me. This is your doing." "You are right about one thing," Red said. "I helped make sure your words got heard. The rest you did on your own." He looked back toward the sheriff. "You heard that," he said. "They all did. What are you going to do now?" The question landed heavy in the cold air. The sheriff stood there, the weight of his badge and years of compromise pressing on him like a physical thing. Then he moved. He walked through the opening crowd, up the shallow steps toward the stage. His boots rang against the wood. His deputies followed, but hung back when he lifted a hand. "Marcus Crane," he said, voice amplified not by speakers but by the fury of the people listening. "You are under arrest." Gasps, shouts, for the first time, real cheers. Shouts. Crane demanded. "You have nothing." "For extortion," the sheriff said. "For arson. For assault. For every charge the state and feds are going to add when they hear that recording and see everything else we have been ignoring. For arson." Crane tried to pull away, tried to turn it into performance. "This is politically motivated," he yelled. "This is harassment. I will have your badge. I will." The sheriff snapped the cuffs on, the metal bite of them audible, even without a microphone. "You already had my soul," the sheriff said quietly. "You are not keeping it." Reporters surged closer, microphones thrust forward, cameras clicking. Reporters surged closer, lens locked on the sight of Marcus Crane, developer and kingmaker. Lens locked on the sight of Marcus Crane. Red did not cheer. He simply watched. He knew better than to believe this was the end. Developer and kingmaker. Red did not cheer. Appeals. Favors called in. He knew better than to believe this was the end. Red did not cheer. Crane had finally been heard in his true voice. Red felt his phone buzz in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a photo from Doc, Emma, in a station waiting room, safe in her mother's arms, watching a news report on a mounted television, Crane's face in cuffs on the screen. Red lifted his eyes back to the courthouse as they led the man who had torched her life through the doors. For the first time since this started, he let himself breathe all the way to the bottom of his lung. It was not over. But for once, the fight was on a field Crane did not own. And that, Red knew, was how men like this finally fell. Red spent the first night after the courthouse on a plastic mattress in a holding cell, watching fluorescent light buzz and die, and buzz again above his head. The sheriff had insisted protective custody. He had called it until the dust settled. By the second night, the dust was moving again. They let Red go at dawn with a warning and a look that said the sheriff knew the storm was not done. Red met the crew in the back lot, reclaimed his Harley, and they rode to a cheap motel on the edge of town. The kind of place where the clerk did not bother to look up from his television when they paid cash. They were there less than an hour when Margaret called. He answered on the first ring. "Tell me you are sitting down." She said, "I am not." He replied. There was a strained laugh, then her voice went flat. "Crane posted bail," she said. $2 million, wired in, and cleared in under 6 hours. He walked out the back door of the county lockup just after midnight. Red felt the words hit, but they did not surprise him. Men like Crane did not stay behind bars on the first try. "They will lock him again," Red said. "The recording, the press conference. They cannot ignore that." "I wish that was the worst of it," Margaret said. "The investigator in the Attorney General's office, the one I told you was building a case on him. She was in a car accident this morning. They say black ice. She is in a coma." He closed his eyes for a second. "That is not weather," he said. "No," she said. "And there is more." Crane went federal. The room seemed to sharpen around him. "Say that again." "He called in a favor with an old friend in the Justice Department," Margaret said. "Some prosecutor he helped put in that chair. Federal warrants dropped an hour ago. You and every man riding with you have been labeled domestic terrorists. They have your names on lists, your faces in fax machines. No bail. Shoot, if necessary." Tank, sitting on the edge of the other bed, watched Red's jaw tighten. "So he wants to be the state now," Red said. "He already is," Margaret replied. On paper, Red looked at his brothers. Mud still caked their boots. Bruises mapped their faces. They did not look like terrorists. They looked like men who had not slept in days. He swallowed the anger down where it belonged. "Where are the families?" he asked. "The ones who stood up on that lawn." "Scattered," Margaret said. "Hiding. Praying Crane is too busy coming for you to bother with them." He ended the call with a promise he did not know how to keep yet, and pocketed the phone. "We are radioactive," Smoke said, leaning back against the headboard. "Any time one of us shows our face, some state trooper is going to think he is a hero for taking us down." "Good," Red said. "Let them aim at us. As long as they are looking our way, Crane will have to send someone else to do his dirty work." Tank frowned. "What are you saying?" "I am saying we split up," Red said. "We watch the families. Hendersons, Carters, the man who lost his restaurant, the widow from the East Side, everyone who spoke into Margaret's camera. They are the ones Crane has to erase if he wants this to go away." Bear shook his head slowly. "We cannot be everywhere at once." "We do not have to," Red said. "We just have to be somewhere he is not expecting us." "We do not have to," Red said. "Divided the county with a borrowed road atlas and a pen that bled a thin red line through farmland and trailer parks and dead gas stations. In the end, they split the list. Red took Margaret and 3 families close to town. Tank and Bear headed west. Smoke and Wolf went south. They rode out just as the sun began to burn through the morning haze, each man carrying a handful of names and the weight that came with them. Red's first stop was Margaret's small house on the edge of downtown, a narrow place with flaking paint and a porch overloaded with potted plants. "You should not be here," she said when she opened the door, kind of late to start listening to good advice. Red said, "Pack a bag. You are not sleeping here tonight. I have work to do." She protested. "You can write from anywhere," he said. "Crane's men know this address. They grabbed you off your own floor once. I am not giving them a second shot." She stared at him. "You've said," then stepped aside. "5 minutes." She said, "Try not to get shot while I find my laptop." He moved back onto the yard, scanning the street. Cars rolled past in a slow, normal rhythm. Joggers moved along the sidewalk. It looked like any other morning in any other small town that did not realize it was sitting on dynamite. His phone buzzed again. "Tank, we have got a problem," Tank said. His voice was sharp, clipped, riding the edge of breath like he was moving fast. "Henderson Farm. 2 cars with out-of-state plates. 4 men, all armed. They just tried to put this family on the ground like they were taking out a witness on television." Red's grip tightened on the phone. "Status," he said. "2 down," Tank said. 2 ran. "Family is alive." "Shockin'. You need to see what they brought." "What did they bring?" "A list," Tank said. "Names. Addresses. Our people." Red. "The Hendersons are number 3. A cold line traced up Red's spine. "Who is number 1? There was a pause. "Margaret Chen," Tank said. Red did not remember crossing the porch. 1 second he was on the lawn. The next he was in the house, moving through the narrow front room with his heart banging against his ribs. "Margaret!" he shouted. No answer. The hallway was a mess. A lamp shattered on the floor. Her phone lay near the baseboard. Screen spider-webbed. The bedroom door hung open at an odd angle. One of the hinges was ripped clean out of the frame. Red stepped inside. The bed was skewed. Sheets tangled like something had fought hard on them. A smear of blood marked the wall. Low, at shoulder height for someone Margaret's size, there was no body. His phone rang in his hand. Unknown number. He answered, "Hello." "Unknown number," Marcus Crane said. There was no music behind his voice this time. "No crowd." "Hello," he answered. "You are calling from a cell? That is bad strategy for a man out on bail." There was no music behind his voice this time. He answered, Crane said, "When I need a phone to disappear, it disappear. When I need a problem to disappear, it disappears too." Red moved back into the hallway, eyes mapping exits, every sense strung tight. "If you hurt her," he said, "I will." "You will what?" Crane cut in. "Kill me. Please. You had your chance, and you chose the stage and the cameras and the moral high ground. Now you are the one being hunted, and I still own half the men with guns in this part of the country. What do you want?" Red asked. "Simple," Crane said. "You and your little biker charity gang leave this county tonight. You never come back. You drop your crusade. And in exchange, the reporter lives, and if we do not, then I make sure her death sends a message." Crane said, "And after her, I start chipping away at your miracle child up north. Emma, is it? Sweet girl, very loyal. It would be a shame if something happened on her way to school someday." Red's hand shook for the first time since this started. Not from fear, from the effort it took not to put his fist through the closest wall. "You touch that kid," he said, "and there will not be a system in this country that can protect you from me." Crane laughed softly. "There it is," he said. "That is what I wanted to hear. The threat, the temper, the terrorism file is writing itself. You have 12 hours. Red, get on your bikes and ride out of my life, or I start mailing pieces of it back to you." The line went dead. "Get on your bikes and ride out of my life." He called the sheriff. "I told you not to be here," the sheriff said. He called the sheriff, stress scraping his voice raw. Red said, "You know it, and I know it. Where would he take somebody he wanted to break quietly? Somewhere he owns. You know it, and I know it." Silence. When the sheriff spoke again, the words sounded like they hurt. "There is an old meat-packing plant on the east side," he said, "closed 15 years back. Crane picked it up through some holding company when nobody else wanted to pay to tear it down. If I were going to make somebody disappear, that is where I would do it." "You coming?" Red asked. "You go in there and start a firefight," the sheriff said, "and you will prove every charge on that federal warrant. You call me when you have her. I will bring every deputy I can get. And we will do this by the book." Books did not mean much to Red in that moment, but he remembered Emma's face when she had asked him if hurting Crane would be how this ended. "We will try," he said. He hung up and called the crew in, one by one, pulled them off their routes, and pointed every engine east. The meat plant rose out of the industrial district like a rotting tooth, brick and rust and broken windows. A chain-link fence sagged around the property, gate hanging open, no lights, no sign of life from the road. Red did not trust the quiet. They left the bikes 3 blocks away and moved in on foot. Wolf took the west side. Smoke circled behind the loading docks. Tank and Bear flanked the main entrance. Red slipped through a side door where some bored guard had snapped the padlock and never bothered to replace it. The air inside was cold and wet, heavy with the ghosts of blood and bleach. He heard voices before he saw them. Down a long corridor lined with rusted hooks and cracked tiles, light spilled from a room at the far end. Malvoisie. Joking, the brittle kind that tried to hide nerves. A woman's voice, sharp and defiant underneath, saying something he could not make out. Red signaled with his hand, and the men closed in. The room was a former processing floor, now stripped bare. In the center sat a chair bolted to the concrete. Margaret was tied to it, wrists lashed, face swollen and split at the lip. 6 men ringed her. 1 smoked, 1 checked his phone, 2 cradled rifles. Wolf hit the side door on Red's count of 3. Tank crashed through the opposite entrance on 2. Bear and Smoke followed, guns leveled, voice pounding commands. It was over fast. 3 men dropped their weapons and hit the floor. 2 reached for guns and got bullets through their legs for their trouble. The 6th made the mistake of grabbing Margaret's hair as a shield. Red was on him in a heartbeat, his fist breaking the man's grip. Before his skull kissed the concrete, the world went still again. Margaret sagged in the chair, breath coming hard. "You took your time," she rasped as Red cut the ropes. He hid a grin. "You looked busy," he said. They had just pulled her free when headlights swept across the high windows. Smoke swore under his breath and crossed to the grimy glass. "We have company," he said. "Lots of it." Engines growled outside. Doors slammed. Dozens of boots hit asphalt. Red moved to the window and looked. Black sport utilities fanned out in the lot. Men in tactical vests poured out, some with Crane's private security insignia, some without any mark at all. He pulled his phone. "You coming?" he asked the sheriff. "I am 5 minutes out," the sheriff said, "with 3 deputies. But Red, state police are on my tail and they are not coming to help you. The feds flagged your warrant. They think you are staging some kind of siege." "How long?" Red asked. 10 minutes, maybe less." Red hung up and looked at the others. "We have Crane's men outside, and state troopers on the way. He said, "We are about to be the meat in a very ugly sandwich." Wolf cocked his head toward the far wall. "Unless we get out of the bread," he said. There was a heavy metal door there, painted the same flaking white as the tiles. A rusted sign above it read "Boiler Room." Red crossed the floor and yanked it open. A flight of steel stairs dropped into darkness. The air that rose up was hot and damp, tasting of rust and steam. "Old plants like this have tunnels," he said. "Pipes and maintenance corridors under the whole structure. If we are lucky, one of them spits us out somewhere past their perimeter. And if we are not lucky," Tank asked, "then we make a new exit." Red said. Gunfire cracked from outside, bullets punching through the outer walls, sending chips of brick raining onto the concrete. Red grabbed Margaret's arm. "Steady but not gentle. Time to move," he said. They went down into the dark, while the building above them filled with the thunder of men who still believed they were in control. The tunnels breathed heat around them, a long iron throat under the dead plant. Pipes hissed and ticked. Water dripped somewhere in the dark, slow and steady, like a clock counting down. Red ran with one hand, skimming the slick concrete, the other braced under Margaret's elbow. Her breath sawed in and out, but she kept moving. Camera bag banging against her hip. Her breath sawed in and out. Behind them, Tank and Bear shoved the captured gunmen forward, zip ties biting their wrists. Behind them, boots splashing through the shallow water. Overhead, behind them, muffled boots pounded across the floor they had just abandoned. A voice barked orders, distant but urgent. Then a single shot, and a bullet screamed along the pipe overhead, showering them with rust. "Move," Red snapped. The passage forked at a rusted junction. One branch stank of stagnant water and rot. The other carried a faint thread of cold air, and the distant tang of gasoline. He took the air. The ceiling dropped low, forcing them into a hunched lope. Metal scraped leather. Every footfall echoed too loud. At the end of the tunnel, a rectangle of dirty light widened with each step. Wolf went up the ladder first, easing the hatch open with careful hands, pausing with his eyes just above the edge. "Back lot," he murmured down. "Far side of the property," he murmured down. "Yet." Red pushed Margaret toward the ladder. "Up," he said. "Now." She climbed with shaking legs. Wolf caught her under the arms and hauled her through, one by one. They emerged into the pale wash of late afternoon. The air hit like ice after the furnace heat below. On this side of the plant, the world looked almost peaceful. A cracked asphalt lot, a line of scrub grass pressed against a chain-link fence. Beyond that, the back wall of an old feed store with peeling paint and a sign half fallen. Sirens wailed faintly from the far side of the complex, where Crane's men and the first wave of law enforcement were busy circling ghosts. "We are not staying to see who wins that argument." Smoke muttered. Red scanned the lot. "There," he said, along the alley that ran behind the shuttered feed store, a white box truck sat with its nose pointed toward the road. Company logo faded to a ghost on its side. The driver's door hung slightly ajar, as if someone had left in a hurry months ago and never come back. "Perfect," Tank said. They sprinted across the gravel, piled into the cab, and the empty cargo hold. The engine coughed when Red turned the key, then caught with a rattling roar. Fan belt whining. He rolled them out of the alley, keeping his speed just shy of suspicious, merging with the thin traffic heading away from the industrial district. In the back, Margaret sat on a crate, head tipped against the metal wall, eyes closed, recorder clutched in both hands. Through the dirty windshield, Red watched the town slide by. Houses with sagging porches, kids on bikes, a woman dragging a trash bin to the curb. Half of them would go their entire lives, without knowing how close they had come to being swallowed by a man like Crane. The other half already knew, and had given up believing anyone would ever help. He drove until the town thinned to scrub and gravel lots. An abandoned feed store appeared on the right, its windows boarded, its gravel yard empty. Red swung the truck into the back lot and killed the engine. Silence rushed in, heavy and ringing. They climbed out. Heat radiated from the hood. Dust hung in the still air. Red's phone buzzed. "You alive?" The text read, "Pin." He sent their location. A taxi's engine whined a few minutes later, long before anyone's heart had slowed. The sedan pulled into the lot and stopped in a spray of gravel. Margaret straightened, pushing away from the truck. As the driver's door opened, Margaret stepped out, one hand still on her ribs, the other tightening the strap of her bag. She looked smaller in the open space, more fragile, but her eyes were clear and sharp. "You look like hell," she said. "You should see the other guys," Wolf muttered. She almost smiled, then saw the zip-tied men slumped in the truck's shadow, and the smile died. "Is it over?" she asked. "No," Red said. "It is finally where it needs to be." His phone vibrated again. Jackson Reeves' voice came cold and tired through the speaker when Red answered. "I have spent the last day wading through the mess that is Marcus Crane." Jackson said, "I have enough for charges in multiple states. Money laundering, bribery, fraud. All of it. But the higher up this goes, the more hands start shaking. You know how that story goes. They are going to try to smother it." Red said, "They are going to try." Jackson agreed, "Unless you make that impossible." "How?" Red asked. "You want to beat a man like Crane. You do not whisper in a courtroom." Jackson said, "You shout in a place where every camera is pointed at him, and then you hand the world the receipts." Red looked across the highway. On the far hill, the crane tower stabbed at the sky, glass blazing in the low sun. The developer's name in steel letters high enough to cast a shadow over half the county. He stared at those letters for a long, quiet beat. Then he closed his eyes and saw Emma's face, streaked with soot. The first time she had looked up at him on that diner floor. He saw her clutching a burned teddy bear, saw her sitting straight-backed in a motel chair, hand in her mother's, asking who would ever listen if the police would not. He opened his eyes. "We go to him," Red said. Tank exhaled a soft curse. "To his tower," he said, "with warrants out on us. With every cop in 3 counties hunting our plates, nothing about this has been safe from the start." Red answered, "The only difference now is that we know the cameras will be on." Margaret stepped closer, listening. "If you walk into that building," she said, "they will arrest you on sight." "They might," Red agreed, "but they will have to walk past him in cuffs to get to us." He pointed with his chin at the tower. "We are done running," he said. "We gave him his chance to scare us off. He took his shot. Now we take ours." He turned to Margaret. "You do not have to come," he told her. "This can get very ugly, very fast." She gave a short, humorless laugh. "You think I am going to sit this out?" she said. "After everything he has done, after everything you have done? No. Someone needs to hold the lens while the truth comes through." Red looked at his crew. "No," he said. "Last call." Tank rolled his shoulders. "No shame in walking away," he said. "If we were going to walk." Bear grinned. "Besides, we would have done it before the meat plant," he said. Wolf and Smoke nodded. "All right then," Red said. "Let us crash his castle." They left the box truck tucked behind the feed store and rode the Harleys into town. The ride in felt like a march more than a getaway. Engines rumbled low, heads turned on sidewalks, people lifted their phones, unsure whether they were filming criminals or something else entirely. The tower grew with every block, a polished monument, in a town that still carried dust in its seams. The glass panels caught the dying light and threw it back in hard sheets. Crane's name gleamed in steel letters high above. Red parked at the curb. The others lined up beside him, chrome and black under the glass face of power. Margaret slid off the back of Wolf's bike, steadied herself, and lifted her phone. A small green light blinked as she went live. Inside the lobby, security surged like a reflex. A small green light blinked as she went live. Inside the lobby, hands hovering near weapons. "You cannot be here." One of them snapped, voice tight. "Building is on lockdown. Turn around and leave." Red kept walking. "We are not here for the building," he said. "We are here for its owner." A guard reached for his arm. He said, redirecting the grab with a simple, economical twist that sent the man stumbling sideways without a punch thrown. Wolf planted himself between another guard and his holster, eyes calm. "Do not be stupid." Wolf planted himself between another guard and his holster. Tank stepped in. Red hit the elevator button. The ride up felt longer than it was. Margaret's phone showed a chat feed racing past, avatars and comments stacking in a blur. The number watching jumped and jumped. "You are sure about this?" she murmured. "No," Red said, "but it is the only road left that leads through him instead of around him." The doors opened on the top floor. The carpet was too soft. The air smelled faintly of expensive cologne and something colder underneath. "You do not want to be the one who starts shooting in front of a live stream." A receptionist stared at them, eyes wide. Her gaze flicked from the patches on their cuts to Margaret's camera to Red's face. "He is waiting," she whispered, nodding toward a pair of tall glass doors. Red pushed them open. Marcus Crane stood behind a desk that looked big enough to land a helicopter on. Framed by the floor-to-ceiling view of the town he thought he owned. Two men with rifles lingered at the edges of the room, suits stretched tight across their shoulders. For once, Crane did not have his press smile on. He had been watching the stream. Red could see the faint outline of the live chat reflected in the glass behind him. "Well," Crane said, and there was a quiver under the smoothness. "You really will do anything for attention, will you not?" "We have very different definitions of attention," Red replied. "I call this accountability." He stepped forward and set a flash drive on the gleaming desk. Beside it, he laid a slim folder thick with copies. "Money," he said, "from places it should not be. To people you should never have paid. Paper trails, shell companies, land transfers, fake vendors. Names of county officials who suddenly started living above their salaries right after meeting with your subsidiaries. All of it backs up what people here have been whispering for years." Crane's gaze dipped to the folder and back. "You hacked my accounts," he said. "No," Red said. "You paid a man to do your dirty work for years, and he kept his receipts. He decided he did not want to die with you still walking free." "Mitchell," Margaret whispered. Crane's mouth twitched. "You truly do not understand how this works," he said. "Courts do not convict on stories told by dying cowards and vigilantes streaming on the internet. They convict on evidence gathered legally and arguments made by lawyers you cannot afford to fight." Jackson's voice cut in from Margaret's speaker. "That is the thing, Mr. Crane," he said. "The evidence you are looking at was not gathered by bikers. It was handed over to federal investigators by someone inside your operation. We have our own copies. So does the state attorney general. So does a short list of reporters who do not work for anyone you have ever donated to." Crane's confidence faltered. He glanced at the bodyguards, then at the camera. "You have nothing on me. I cannot fight," he said. But the words lacked weight. Red shook his head. "What I have is not the point," he said. "What they have is not even the point. The real problem for you is that people are watching. They remember the tape from the courthouse. They are hearing you now in your real voice, in your real place, facing the people you hurt." He nodded at the window. You stood up in that square and talked about progress while families you burned out of their homes stood 20 feet away. Red said, you paid men to beat a husband and burn his farm. You sent your dogs after a little girl across a border. And still you thought you could spin this into a story where you are the victim. Margaret's camera caught all of it. The tightness around Crane's eyes, the sweat at his hairline. Red stepped back and raised his hands slightly, palms open. I am done talking, he said. The rest is between you, the law, and everyone watching. As if on cue, the doors burst inward. Uniforms poured into the room. As if on cue, Red and his crew dropped to their knees without being asked. Hands laced behind their heads, he said. Red and his crew dropped to their knees without being asked. Hands laced behind their heads. A federal officer swept the room with a hard gaze, landing on Crane, then on Red. We have multiple warrants executed in coordination with the state and county. The officer announced, Marcus Crane, you are under arrest for racketeering, conspiracy, aggravated arson, kidnapping, and a host of additional charges. You will place your hands where I can see them. Crane sputtered. This is madness, he said. You cannot take my word against the word of criminals. Look at them. Look at what they have done. You are under arrest for racketeering, the officer replied. Your word is not what brought us here. The sheriff pushed his way through the line of federal agents, badge catching the light. I should have done this years ago, he said, voice rough. Maybe if I had, fewer people would have been hurt. He took out a pair of cuffs. The click echoed loud in the room. As they walked Crane past, the developer twisted his head toward Red. You have not won, he hissed. Men like me never really lose. Someone will take my place. Maybe, Red said quietly. But now folks know what to look for. Maybe. The door closed behind Crane. But now folks know what to look for. Hands still, the officer said. You are also coming with us. Red nodded. He looked at Margaret's lens one last time. I am not running, he said, voice steady. I am surrendering on my feet after walking into the man's own tower to show you what he is. Whatever you call me after this, do not forget who lit the first match. They let him out in cuffs. The ride down in the elevator felt longer than the ride up. In the lobby, a crowd had gathered behind hastily erected barriers. Phones rose like a second ceiling. Screens glowing. People pressed against the line as officers brought Crane out first. Then Red and his brothers, somebody cheered, somebody cursed. Most just filmed miles away. In a rented trailer across the border, Emma watched the grainy footage on a small television. Tommy slept against Sarah's side. The room smelled of reheated soup and the harsh cleaner the landlord used on the floors. He did it, Emma whispered. Sarah wiped at her eyes. He did, she said. He did everything he said he would. The months that followed blurred into hearings and arguments, stories and counter-stories. Margaret wrote until her shoulders ached, telling the truth over and over from different angles. Jackson worked evidence through a system that creaked and groaned under the weight. People in suits resigned, retired, or were pushed out. Graves, thin as paper, took the stand and emptied his conscience in front of the world. Through it all, Red sat behind glass and steel, a number on a docket, while men and women in robes and badges decided what to call him. In the end, the story people had seen with their own eyes would not bend far enough to fit the label Crane's allies had tried to glue on him. Domestic terrorist did not match the man who had walked into danger with his hands open and his camera rolling while a developer tried to hide behind legal walls the day they opened his cell and told him he could go. The sunlight felt almost unreal on his skin. Jackson waited beyond the fence with Tank and Bear and Wolf and Smoke, their bikes lined up like patient horses. You are not a saint, Jackson said. You broke laws. You scared the hell out of people who were used to being comfortable, but every time we tried to stack your actions against his, the scales refused to balance the way his friends wanted them to. Red shrugged. I never aimed to be a saint, he said. Just a man who stops when he sees a kid in the road. The Patterson farm looked different when he rolled up the lane again. The scorched earth had long since been turned over and made to carry green tow. The new house sat where the old one had burned. Lines clean but not fancy, built for living, not for showing off. Laughter drifted from the open kitchen window. Emma barreled off the porch when she heard the engines, longer legs eating the distance. She crashed into him with enough force to rock him back a step. You are late, she said into his chest. Traffic, he said. She pulled away, grinning through the tears that had spilled over. You came, she said. Always, he answered. Later. As the sun slid down and painted the fields gold, they sat on the tailgate of an old truck and watched Tommy kick a ball in the yard. Sarah and Daniel moved between kitchen and porch, setting out food for a small crowd of neighbors who had stopped by just to see with their own eyes that what they had watched on screens was real. I got into the university in town, Emma said. Per-law. Margaret wrote a recommendation and everything, Emma said. Per-law. Red smiled. He said, the fight is here, she replied. Men like him do not just exist in cities. They grow in places where people are too tired or too scared to push back. I want to be the one on the other end of the table when the next Emma Patterson walks in with nothing but a burned toy and a story nobody believes. He looked at her, really looked, and saw all the versions of her layered at once. The ash-streaked child in a diner, the girl clutching a bracelet, the young woman with steel in her spine and law books in her future. You are going to change more than this county, he said. Because of you, she began. He shook his head. Because you decided not to stay quiet, he said. I just made sure someone was there to hear you. Engines idled at the edge of the yard. The crew waited, helmets hooked on handlebars, ready for whatever road called next. Emma slid off the tailgate and walked with him to his bike. Will I see you again? She asked. He cupped the small bracelet on his wrist, the one she had tied years ago now, faded and reknotted, threads holding in stubborn defiance. You call, he said, and I will ride. She hugged him hard, then stepped back. Thank you for stopping, she said softly. He swung his leg over the Harley, settled into the familiar weight of the seat, and looked once more at the farmhouse, at the family on the porch, at the girl on the edge of everything. Then he turned the key. The engines rose as one, a low, rolling thunder that shook the dust from the lane and scattered birds from the fence line. 6 bikes pulled out, tires crunching gravel, then humming on blacktop as they took the bend and pointed their fronts toward the long, unknowable distance. Somewhere ahead, Red knew, another road bent around another quiet horror. Another family sat in a kitchen believing nobody would come. Another child stared at a door and wondered if anyone on the other side of the world ever chose to stop. He leaned into the wind and let it take his answer out in front of him. As long as he was breathing, someone would. At its heart, this story is not really about bikers and a billionaire developer. It is about what happens when ordinary people decide they will no longer drive past someone else's burning house, literally or figuratively. Red and his crew are rough around the edges, but they remind us that decency does not always show up in a suit and tie. Emma's family shows another truth. You can be pushed to the edge of everything you've built, called crazy, ignored by the very systems meant to protect you, and still choose not to let bitterness define you. Crane is a reminder of the quieter injustices many adults know too well. The boss who abuses power, the official who looks away, the way money can bend the rules. But as we say, what goes around comes around. It may take time, it may be messy and imperfect, but you reap what you sow still carries weight. The story invites us, especially in this season of life, to ask ourselves, where am I staying silent just to keep the peace? Who have I told myself it's not my business about when I know I could at least make a call, speak a word, stand beside them? And on the other side, where have I believed the lie that my voice no longer matters because I am older, tired, or not that important? If this story touched something in you, I would love to hear it. Share your thoughts or your own experiences with speaking up in the comments. Hit like if you want more stories that mix drama with real questions about justice. And subscribe so you do not miss the next journey. Whatever storms you are walking through, I hope you find people who stop for you and the strength to stop for someone else. May you rest tonight with a little more peace and a little more hope.